Folks, it is vital for us to get a hold of the significance of our caregiver, God, and to trust Him. Let me illustrate it this way. As long as I've been talking about antique things like before iPods, etc., let's go way back. David Lloyd George. Anybody know anything about this guy? Come on. Huh? You haven't studied him lately? Okay. Randy's right. He's the Prime Minister of England from the years of 1916 to 1933. Unique individual. I have to confess, I knew very little about him until I read this about him and then did some additional study and got rather fascinated with the gentleman. There are actually, if you are an internet searcher, you can find various videos of him. He was a powerful orator. You know, we often think of Winston Churchill as England's prime minister, but this guy was right up there. And you can listen to some of his videos. There was one in which apparently the United States was offering England some advice following the war. And I mean, his arms are going and his mouth and his voice is shouting. And his question to his countrymen is, shall we accept America's money and not accept their ideas? You know, he was very political. Actually, once he finished as prime minister, he became the head of a political party in England. And the list of political achievements are astonishing. But significant is the fact that he was prime minister during World War I, during a very troubled time in England's history. The particular story that I want to recount for you actually takes place by this time in this incident, in this period of history. There have been 1 million Brits that have been killed in World War I. There was a day in which he had a particularly grueling meeting that he assembled many high officials in the government, and they had a strategy meeting trying to come up with plans, etc. And it was an extremely difficult meeting. And so that night, he was so disturbed he was having difficulty sleeping. He actually called for his household servant to come, and his intention was he was going to ask him to make him a cup of tea. The servant came in, and he said, I would like for you to bring me a cup of tea. And the servant said this, Do you believe God was in charge of yesterday? To which Lloyd George said, yes. And then the servant asked, do you believe that God will be in charge of tomorrow? To which he said, absolutely. So then the servant, wanting to go back to bed, said, then you can believe he is in charge of tonight. Forget the tea and go to bed. Why do you think a servant would ask such a question? Well, the reason was because that Earl George was a professed Christian. As a matter of fact, and this will make you want to research him, you and I would call him Brother George. As he had left his Baptist background, had relatives who were both Baptist ministers, and he had joined the Stone and Campbell movement and was indeed a brother of ours. Interesting, in all of England, as few of Christians as there were, this gentleman was our brother. Isn't it true that no one can negate the heavy responsibilities that fell upon him? Yet a household servant could remind him that he needed to trust his divine Creator. Don't you and I stand in that need as well? When all this stuff of life begins to come in on us, when all the troubles become so burdensome, when things just seem to not be going right, and boy, Kyle, the songs that you selected this morning were just so powerful about exalting God to His needed position in our life and our spiritual submission to that. Don't we need to be reminded when the battles are raging that God is still our caregiver? We need to sing Psalms 120. 4 things that are assurances that are shared within this psalm. Number one, the Maker is on my side. The Maker is on my side. Look at the first two verses of this psalm. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Do you notice the personal connection here? After verse 2, it switches to your. But the first two verses are a very personal expression. Where does my help come from? Folks, I think the reason that this song was sung as an exalting song was because it demonstrates our personal belief that God is my helper. He is on my side. Looking to the hills. Interesting terminology. Looking to the hills. What did that mean? Well, during this time in history, it could have meant any number of things. One of them, the hills were a place of military power, weren't they? Think of all the cities that were built on high places so that they could have that military oversight of the area beneath. It demonstrated a political power, military power. It also was a place, if you will, of personal escape. Fleeing to the mountains, finding refuge, finding a hiding place was a common thing. It also would represent perhaps a place where false gods were worshipped. Remember throughout the Old Testament reading of the high places and people going there to worship false gods and various kings who would tear down the high places. Here is the psalm, and he says, should I look to the mountain? Is there a military power that's going to be strong enough? Is there a personal hiding place that will be deep enough? Is there something else I can worship that will be strong enough? The psalm says no. My help comes from God. My help comes from God. The Hebrew word for help signifies protection. My protection, if you will, comes from God. The God who made heaven and earth can surely make a protected place for me, can he not? My help comes from the Lord. You know what this means? It means that the God who is on my side can provide shelter for every turmoil, trouble, or trial. And that there is no exception to. Who of us does not sympathize with Dwayne's 5-month bout struggle? But the Lord was always his helper. Who of us cannot think of others suffering in our body? And cannot appreciate that the God of the universe is on their side. The first assurance, God's on my side. The second assurance, my God never slumbers. My God never slumbers. He will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will never slumber nor sleep. Sleep is a really unique thing. I think studies continue to reveal all that our bodies accomplish during sleep. You know, most of us we rest. But there are phenomenal things that transpire while we sleep. One of the amazing things about sleep is it really is a state of unconsciousness and unawareness. And so when doctors want to do something on the inside, what do? They put you to sleep. And in that sleep, there's no comprehension of things. I remember as a young person when I was having some surgery and the doctor came in and he was upset because nothing was set up properly. And of course they'd given this hypo thing, and so you're kind of loopy anyhow. And he starts yelling at the nurses about the way nothing is arranged properly. So you can guess what's going through my head. No, don't let me go! But I went to sleep. And I have no recollection of what happened after that. Our God is never unconscious. Our God is never unaware because he never sleeps. You know, it was common during, especially this time in history that this psalm was written, this Old Testament period, it was common for people to believe that God slept. You know, many of the ancient mythological gods were individuals, and they had time that they slept. Even, you remember on Mount Carmel, that there's the challenge that perhaps that Baal is asleep, and maybe he needs to be woken up. They need to scream louder to get their God to send fire. Common for people to believe that their deities slept. This psalm says God never sleeps. He is always aware of my every step. And what a phenomenal motivation that should be for us. That there is nothing that God is not aware of. This is kind of fun. Has it ever occurred to you that nothing ever occurs to God?